Kierkegaard's relationship with Regina Olsen, which was so decisive for his life, because breaking it off, the engagement that he had in 1841 was the occasion for the great burst in his literary productivity, his quote unquote authorship, which in a remarkable spate of books from 1841 to 1846. During the time that we know, if we were to map it onto Marx's career, that's when Marx was shifting over from the critique of theology into political economy. Well, instead of going that route in dealing with the Hegelian predicament, Kierkegaard is doing something very different, and something that is extraordinary in the history of philosophy, actually. So you can compare what these two great thinkers, these post-Hegelians, are doing in the early 1840s, whereas Marx is going to put us on a path of trying to change the material conditions of the world. Kierkegaard wants to get over the Hegelian problematic by turning us inward and to get us to grapple earnestly with what it means to be human, and in particular, what it means to be a Christian. Now, this isn't meant to shut out those of us in this conversation who might not be Christian, because one can take Kierkegaard's absolute seriousness about that identity and think, what is it about my own life that I'm willing to stake everything on? Is it enough for me to take a social script, say? And that's where you got the Hegelian insertion of the Kantian person into a community. When you take the free moral agent who has this ability to say, I stand over the world and I can critique it. Hegel wants to put flesh on that, wants to say, but you find your role, you find your bearings by living in a community with its given norms. And the trick is then to find those norms rational, to see in the constitutional state or in the moral code of your people that spirit working itself out in a way that gives you as a person a way to stand in the world. Kierkegaard is going to say, this isn't the right path to finding yourself. And it really is this question of to become earnestly who you are, to live your life as you, that single individual, that the system, whatever system, the Hegelian system, the scholastic system, any system at all, any system of thought is not going to be able to, according to Kierkegaard, is not going to be able to give you a sense of what your life is most radically about. And so that's the challenge that we have from Kierkegaard. One thing I didn't note in the introductory video too much, I did say it, but I didn't get into it enough. When Kierkegaard is talking about the basic forms of life, aesthetic, moral, and religious, he's dealing with religious in a Kantian form, but also in probably more, particularly in the Hegelian form. And why we need to think about this is, and this is an interesting thought, but Kierkegaard is actually he's critiquing the old or right Hegelians. And in that respect, in that kind of strange way, he stands with Marx, because both of their opponents are the Hegelians that wanted to take Hegel and turn him into a supporter of the bourgeois Christianity of the time. What you have in that case is a Christian, and it really is still the case now, bourgeois Christianity. That is a Christianity that is where all the forms are preserved. Like Hegel could go to Lutheran services, say the creed, and he could go through all of the liturgical motions and have no qualms about it. All the forms are preserved, but he's replaced the supernatural content with something secular. That is, reason, quote unquote, has provided the content for this bourgeois Christianity. And I say quote unquote because, of course, what is reason has got to be one of the questions we grapple with today. What is reason? Is it something that reaches up to God, in which case it isn't secular? It's kind of theological. Is reason something that we use to conquer the world, instrumental rationality, which really does define modern times? Is reason closed against transcendence, or is it open to transcendence? What Kierkegaard saw with the Hegelian system, of course, he's not doing, Marx and Kierkegaard are both attacking Hegelian religiosity, but because Marx just wants to get beyond religiosity, Kierkegaard wants to put us into religiosity seriously. And of course, there's something prophetic about this, because even though Europe was still fully Christian at the time Kierkegaard was writing, at the time Marx was beginning to write, within a few decades, of course, Christianity would collapse in Europe. And one would ask why that is. Kierkegaard is famous under the same pseudonymous author, Johannes Climacus, that we have here in Philosophical Fragments, but in the much larger, very funny way, the much larger work called Concluding Unscientific Postscript to this Philosophical Fragments, which is much bigger than Philosophical Fragments. Johannes Climacus says, subjectivity or inwardness is the truth. And that kind of statement is the thing that makes Kierkegaard the hero of existentialism in the 20th century. We want to make sense of that. What does it mean to say that inwardness, what's deepest in you is what's true? And we do get those topics in this selection here. Philosophical Fragments themselves were published in 1844. We all need to think about why it is they're fragments, and that partly has to do with that funny intro that he provides, that Johannes Climacus provides, as far as his being a pamphleteer and not a system builder. He doesn't want to have a system, he wants to have fragments. At one point, Kierkegaard wrote in his journal, Hegel is a Johannes Climacus who does not storm the heavens as do the giants by setting mountain upon mountain, but climbs up to them by means of his syllogism. So we have this interesting authorship where it's not Kierkegaard is claiming to represent the views that we've read tonight. It's this pseudonymous persona, Johannes Climacus, which means John of the Ladder. And the original person was the author of the Ladder of Divine Ascent, a very important mystical work from the late 6th or early 7th century, a hermit monk who would become the abbot of the central monastery at Mount Sinai, a very important figure for the Eastern Orthodox. And so we need to think about what is the standpoint of this author that's not exactly Kierkegaard. He's a poetic philosopher, Kierkegaard. You can't simply ascribe what he's writing here to him, even though, for instance, his broken engagement to Regina is clearly in some way, but that's very crucial, is to have that qualification, in some way bound up in the fairy tale of the king falling in love with the peasant. Is Johannes Climacus here religious? He isn't religious. Is he a philosopher? Maybe, but maybe he's a mystic. And that would be the question, because in fact, and this is an important general point about mysticism, there's something Unitarian about much mystical encounter that allows mystics of any religious tradition to be able to talk to each other. And we would want to see how well that sits to a more dogmatic presentation of Christianity as Trinitarian and incarnational. In this work, we have the philosophical hypothesis of how we attain to the truth, learn the truth, versus the religious hypothesis, the hypothesis of faith. That is, that we either we remember a truth we once knew, or we are untruth somehow, and we need a more radical teacher. We have this philosophical account in Socrates that recollection is all we need, that we need a midwife teacher. We have forgotten what we once knew, and that ignorance is that's what needs to be overcome, is ignorance of the truth. The religious hypothesis is that no, we're actually untruth. And then we need to think about where love fits in. Emma, are you set to read the questions?
So number 1, is a teacher superior to his or her student? If a teacher is an instrument, who or what wields that instrument? Can the truth be taught? In what way could a person somehow be untruth? Number 2, the argument presented in Philosophical Fragments depends on feeling, the pathos of seeking a moment in a time that is filled with decisive significance of eternity. Do we recognize a desire in ourselves for such moments that do not sink into the anonymity of history? Number 3, can there be an erotic or romantic element in God's love for humans? How does Johannes Climacus, the pseudonymous author of Philosophical Fragments, present a vision of the most radical egalitarianism? Why does the love behind such egalitarianism inevitably involve tragedy? Number 4, is the story or poem of divine love a story that can be learned? What does it mean to claim that it is a wonder?
Thank you so much, Emily.